Like what you want to do with children is you want them to be forceful. You want them to have some power.
Exactly.
You want them to integrate that capacity for aggression into, well, let's say, lucid conversation. You want them to be able to stand up for themselves in family discussions. If you just punish them for being aggressive, let's say, for talking back or something like that, you don't guide that into more sophisticated development. You see this in schools too now. When my kids went to school, this was so dumb. We had a rule in our house, which was, you don't have to follow stupid rules.
That's a good rule.
But if you get caught, you have to put up with consequences.
Right.
So one rule was, the school had, not only could you not throw snowballs, you couldn't make them. And so they were trying to, yeah, exactly, you should shake your head, that's for sure. It's like, because their answer, and this was all politically correct nonsense, non-competitive games. We're only going to play non-competitive games. It's like, first of all, I studied Piaget.
Yeah.
A hockey game is not competitive exactly, because in a hockey game, well, no one brings a basketball. Everybody plays hockey. So that's cooperation. And then on the team, you have to cooperate. And like, if you're the star, but you never pass, you're just a dumb son of a bitch. You're not the star. And so there's tremendous amount of cooperation in all those competitive games. They're integrated. And the idea that, children better by not allowing them to be competitive,
it's disgusting.
It is. That's the Freudian devouring mother, right? That's, everyone's safe and no one's going to hurt them.
That's kind of where a lot of young people are, they enter the world where they've been coddled, where they think that there are no winners, that everyone is, it's just win-win situations. And that's where they get really shocked by the realities of the world. So all this coddling and this idea that there doesn't have to be a winner. We don't have to get prizes for first place. Everybody should get a prize. All you're doing is setting your children up for massive, shocks when they enter the world and they see that it's not like that.
Yeah, and then they get disillusioned and depressed, or traumatized by it. I mean, when my son's hockey team in his school, they won the city championship, which was a big deal, and the school was pretty happy about that. To his credit, so was the coach. But the principal, who was this authoritarian empath, she was an awful person, I thought.
Authoritarian
empath. Empath. Yeah, well, yeah. So she used moral virtue as a club. Oh, and it was, there's plenty of those people around.
Yeah.
She said, well, really, today we're all winners. And the coach had exactly. No, it is sickening because my son was just appalled by it, but the coach had enough guts. He said, no, the hockey team won. And it's not like the kids in the school were jealous. Some of them were, obviously, but most of them were really happy, like you are when your sports team wins. And most people are generous enough so that they're able to celebrate someone else's victory without. And that's the same. I saw this with birthday parties. I just bloody well hated this. It's like, well, every child gets a gift bag. It's like, no, they have their damn birthday. Every child doesn't need a damn gift bag. And it's this same naive, freakly, and it's authoritarian too, because it imposes this kind of view of the world. It's like, no, it's this kid's day to be special. That's why we're celebrating this kid. The rest of them, if they can't take that, it's like, there's something wrong with the way that they've been treated and attended to.
Well, a lot of my books, I try to remove the kind of taboo or the negative associations we have with the word like power or with the word ambition. I try and say ambition is a good thing. It means that you believe in yourself, you have some self-love, and you believe you're worth something, and you want to go out and achieve and create something worthwhile for other people. So ambition is a positive thing. But so many people are just kind of embarrassed about being a human being, embarrassed about our primate nature, embarrassed about our own aggressive impulse.
This is partly why boys are failing in our schools now at a disproportionate rate, and I see there's an assault of the sort that you're describing on the better part of striving masculinity. And, I had a friend who killed himself because he identified his ambition with the patriarchal force that's devouring the environment, let's say, and that's the cause of historical horror. And you might say, well, no one takes that onto themselves to that degree. And that's, well, you can say that, but that you just don't know what the hell you're talking about. People take that onto themselves all the time. And then they start to identify the best part of them that drives forward with the destructive impulses of humanity. And they're so ashamed because they can't do anything good then, but in principle.
Yeah.
He tried to be as inoffensive and harmless in every possible way as he possibly could, and it just sucked all the life out of
Well,
him.
you end up turning that aggressive energy on yourself is what ends up happening, and that's maybe leads to suicide, the ultimate kind of self-aggression. I know that I personally have, as I said, I definitely have a shadow side. I'm very aggressive and extremely competitive, and I have a lot of anger. So a lot of those experiences in my youth made me very angry. But the way I kind of integrated my shadow, I'm not saying this is a model, but the way I integrated it was through my books.
Yeah.
So that anger kind of seeps through the material that I write, and I find I can only write when I have that kind of anger. But I don't rant. I don't yell and kind of put people down. I kind of channel it into something productive and something creative.
People have commented, some of the people who've criticized me that I'm an angry person, and which isn't true. But it's definitely that anger, that capacity for anger definitely is something that gives you force and to push, and anger definitely. So psychophysiologically, so imagine that this is obviously a thought experiment. Imagine you're chasing a cat with a broom. Well, the cat's going to run from the broom. But if you corner the cat with the broom, it will attack you, even though it's just a cat. Well, and the reason for that is that fear will facilitate either freezing or escape.
Right.
But sometimes fear isn't the right response, and anger will suppress fear. And so one of the tools that we have at our disposal psychologically is anger as an antidote to the terror that would otherwise freeze you. With regard to sexuality, you said that it is a good question to ask yourself, who is in control? Well, yeah, that's the question, isn't it? If you're masturbating to pornography and the consequence of that is an immediate influx of guilt, then you have to ask yourself, who's in control? And that's a really important question, who's in control? That's what terrified me about developing some psychoanalytic acumen, because once you realize that you're a house that many spirits can and do inhabit, and that many of them aren't you, and that many of them aren't working towards the purposes you might want yourself to be working to, and that's the realization of the myth that you're embodying from the Jungian perspective. It's a very, very serious question. The fundamental human myth is Cain versus Abel. And so who are you? Are you Cain or Abel? Well, the answer is you're both. And then the question is, well, who's got the upper hand? And then the next question is, who do you want to have the upper hand? Is it God and Abel or Satan and Cain? And that's a question that's just as germane to non-believers as it is to believers. And isn't that remarkable and appalling and overwhelming and terrifying all at the same time, if you have any sense of what it means? So, if your behavior is embarrassing you, well, there's only two possibilities, isn't there? You shouldn't be so embarrassed. And I suppose the voice that says yes to all expression of human sexuality would say that your guilt and shame is merely the detrimental hangover of an oppressive patriarchy that's judgmental in its attitudes towards sexuality. Well, yeah, what would you use judgment to differentiate if it isn't sexuality? So I don't think that argument goes anywhere. You have to consult your own conscience. Like, I know the conscience can become an oppressive force on its own. That's the indwelling of the great tyrant, and Freud made much of that, a too oppressive superego. And I've certainly seen clients whose expression of healthy sexuality was inhibited by a too rigid superego. That can definitely happen. But that doesn't mean that all guilt about all forms of sexual expression constitutes a superego run amok. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that there was some relationship between the sexual revolution of the 1960s, which, according to Randy Thornhill, by the way, who's perhaps the world's top biological thinker on this particular topic, Thornhill believed that the liberalism of the 60s was a consequence, at least in part, and in large part, I should say, of the hygienic revolution of the previous 6 decades and more that enabled us to reduce the impact, at least in the West, of infectious diseases. And because we were much less prone to the transmission and receipt of infectious diseases, we could afford to be more liberal by the 1960s. So we got more sexually liberal. And what happened? AIDS. And I say that without prejudice. And what's the most effective means of facilitating the reproduction of a deadly virulent agent and its propagation through the population? Unrestrained sexual behavior.